smaller. The original footprint was about 16 to 18 square miles. How do we bring that down and make people comfortable? Well, we said, okay, number one, let's not use cyanide. Let's keep cyanide out of the region. But that costs us in our gold recovery. We recover 10% less gold because we don't use cyanide. Doesn't impact the footprint, but it impacts the perception. We then said, okay, let's see if we can reduce the size of the project overall and still have a reasonable economic. And so we reduced the size of the processing plant to 160,000 metric tons. And then we said, let's just have a 20-year mine life. And one of the reasons was, this entire deposit, 10 billion tons, it can be mined by open pit, but it might at some point be more reasonable to do what's called, a high volume, large scale underground mining, block caving or panel caving. But for sure, the first 20 years is going to be open pit. And during that 20 years, you'll make a decision on how you will go forward. Will it be open pit only, block cave only, or combination of two? It'll be a combination of the two, I'm pretty sure. So we said, let's only have a 20-year mine life. So that's how we kept the footprint down to 5.5 square miles. Is slightly smaller throughput and a 20-year mine life. But during that 20 years, you're going to make the application to continue for another 20 or another. And so we do have all the studies that go through all of this. And, to increase the size of the mill from 160,000 metric tons per day, we can go to 220, we can go to 320. Again, some of these things you have to go through permitting again, but when you've got 2,000 people working, making $100,000 a year, and the state's collecting money, the area that we're in, the Lake and Penn Borough, which is the municipality, you have to understand, there's hardly any people live in Western Alaska. In 50,000 square miles, there's 7,500 people. And 80% of them are on the coast, anywhere from 120 to 500 miles away from us. The nearest two villages, both 20 miles away, are 100 people each. When you look at 400 or 500 square miles around Pebble, there's maybe 500 people.
So you mean that essentially once the mine is starting producing employment, development, after that, nobody's going to stop it?
No, correct. And then
do you think that it's going to be unstoppable?
Yes. Well, who's going to stop a mine that has 160,000 metric tons per day? The first deposit that we've discovered at Pebble, and there will be more, but the first one lasts 180 years. Now, we could start Pebble at, say, 35,000 tons and grow over a 30, 40-year period. No, we're going to start it at 160,000 tons per day. And maybe it grows to either 260 or 320 over the next 20, 30 years.
No, in America, there's not a single major mine, and there certainly isn't a major oil field that didn't start out small, smaller than it has grown. And there have been constant expansions that have been suggested and approved. That's what would happen here, where this is a well-worn path that we're following to build something that allows us to show the community and the state that we can do it well, that it's not dangerous, and then we'll come in at some point in the future and request an extension of the time and probably an expansion of how much we are producing on a daily basis. Well, to some extent it's political. We probably want to file it when there is a Republican administration, Democratic administration, some of those kinds of things. But frankly, I'm not aware, certainly I'm not aware of a project in Alaska where an expansion has ever been turned down. Okay? And I'm off the top of my head, I can't think of one in America. But I know that's the case in Alaska. And that's because we built all this infrastructure. Remember, it's not just money coming to us, it's money going into the state. I bet you that the state's going to be pounding on us to do an expansion before we're ready to do the expansion. they want the revenue.
So the likelihood is pretty much 100% almost?
Yes. Yes, we'll need to get a federal permit and a state permit. We'll need to go through those processes, but the processes will not be as intense nor as long as this process because you can build on what we've already done.
Well, I'm just saying that based on 180,000 short tons a day of processing capacity, and we have 10 billion tons, that's 180-year mine life. And we know that there's more ore there, so it's probably going to be more than 200 years. I mean, when you look at mines like Bingham Canyon in outside of Salt Lake City, that mine has been operating since the 1880s. When you look at Chuquicamata in Chile, 1880s, 1890s, when those mines started up. So they started obviously much smaller. The biggest mine in the world is Escondida. And Escondida started operating in the late 1980s at a 35,000 ton per day concentrator. Today, it's more than 10 times that size, 360,000 tons per day concentrator. And it's the biggest copper producer in the world, that mine. It's owned by BHP, Rio, Mitsubishi, and the state of Chile.
And so that's very likely to be the path forward for Pebble?
Yes. Once you have something like this in production, why would you want to stop? At the end of the day, its footprint is so tiny. If we mine the whole valley, it's 25 square miles. And the land area out there is 40 to 50,000 square miles. And when the mine's all done and finished, it fills with water, and it's just another lake. And in fact, it'd be a tiny lake. There's a lake nearby us called 6 Mile Lake because it's 6 miles long. And Alaskans say that really shouldn't qualify as a lake. It's not big enough.
So mining the valley would be really natural.
Yes. The Northern Corridor infrastructure part will handle the expansion. And when that expansion comes on, because the PEA talks about, effectively about a 220,000 ton per day concentrator, and what we're building in the first stage is 180,000 ton per day concentrator. And it in all likelihood, the expansion mainly involves just increasing the crushing and grinding capacity. Probably one additional line of secondary mills. Not sure that we would even need a new line of SAG mills. Probably just increase motor size on existing SAG mills. But the Northern Corridor will handle the expansion of Pebble.
So all is already contained, all the expansion, all the key elements of the expansion are already contained in the current project?
Yes.
And that's the plan? That's really the objective?
That is the plan, and that's because the Northern Corridor plan that was submitted as part of the Pebble permitting process really came out of effectively the work that was done to accommodate the PEA. So it already has that capacity in it.
How locked are we into thinking or planning to go beyond 20 years, 180 or so?
Well, it's absolutely, because the ore is there. We've drilled it. We've engineered it. All the work's been done for it. The only thing that we have to do additionally is determine, will there be more open pit exclusively, or will we also do some underground mining, like bulk underground mining, block caving, in which case we need to sink a shaft and do some underground work. That itself will probably be $200 to $300 million, but that will be carried out through that 20-year period, and then we'll make application for another 20 or maybe 40 years of mine life. It's not unusual that mines, in fact, you're better off asking for a permit for 20 years than asking for a permit for 60 years, because we don't know what kind of mine operation we will have in 20 years. We don't know that yet. So when they ask us what the environmental footprint is of that expansion, we can't tell them today. We'll only be able to tell them in, say, year 12 or year 15. See, this project ultimately will look a lot like the Mongolian project, Oyu Tolgoi, where there's an open pit and there's underground.